Friday, May the 22nd, 2009, and we're at the home of Jim Miller again for this is our 8th session with the great man. And Jim, we've talked a lot extensively about your life, and we've talked about sports career, and we've talked about the Thoroughbreds as a director and the singular accomplishments of the course under your leadership. And last session we talked a lot about the citations and about the tremendous experiences you had with that quartet, both as a performance and competition, and also especially in the trip to Vietnam, which was, in your words, maybe the highlight of your barbershop career. I want to begin today and take a few minutes at least to look at another aspect of your barbershop career, and that is your coaching. And because I know you had extensive dealings not only with championship courses in the society, but especially with championship quartets. And I'm going to probably lean on you a little bit to embellish what I know, but I do know that to begin maybe with the Bluegrass Student Union, that was the first championship quartet out of the Thoroughbreds, the Louisville chapter in 1978. We mentioned them briefly in terms of how unique it was at that time for a championship to come to a course and also to a quartet at the same time. So let's begin with them, and then we'll move to the interstate rivals, and we'll move to Marquee and the Gas House Gang and others that you can fill in at your experience. So what was it like in the early 70s as the citations in general, and you in particular, began to coach these young kids who became the international champions of Bluegrass Student Union?
Well, it's really kind of hard to pinpoint exact things and exact incidents. See, they were all a part of the chorus and very active part of the chorus, and there were so many things that their quartet did that intermeshed with chorus activity. And we were involved in some of the very preliminary things and some of the early things of the Bluegrass Student Union. And a couple of songs, but there was no question about the fact that there was a tremendous talent there. We were, after some of the original uses of our coaching, after a little bit of that in the beginning, it became, I think primarily after that, we became kind of father confessors to them. As opposed to actually going after the singing techniques and things like that, they took it from a great amount of it from chorus activity, and but in the beginning there was things that took place that four kids needed sometimes to talk about, and that, I think, pretty much, at least from my standpoint anyway, the other three guys probably were a little bit more into actual singing situations and everything. But with me, it became pretty much a dear old dad type thing. And then they moved on into some great coaching from kind of a conglomerate of coaches headed up by Don Claus. And the rest is history. I mean, but after their championship, and then they became so innovative. I mean, they set so many standards as far as quartet performances are concerned. I mean, if you can remember back, I mean, they're using a barbershop, using themes. They did a theme. They did Mills Brothers songs. They did
Music Man,
big band songs.
Yeah.
Jukebox Saturday Night was just part of that type of thing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
And like I said, they were so innovative. They just went off into themes, and they did whole show themes and everything. They did gospel themes. They did so many. They were so innovative about that kind of thing. So they set a lot of standards that way. And with that in mind, they had to, or they did go to the more skilled people, the people that wrote arrangements, became very, very influential for them. And so, very beginning of it, to get them started, we were with them pretty heavy. As they moved along and expanded and everything, then they moved in a little bit further away.
Did you use them as section leaders in a sense? How did that work?
Well, there again, they were part of the music team and not section leaders per se. They were a musical team, and they were involved with all phases of it. And I don't. Rick Stabb kind of didn't participate quite as much. Danny was very active when he was at actual rehearsals. He wasn't able to attend maybe outside meetings and things like that so much because of his job. You know, being a newsman with the top TV station here in Louisville kind of made it a little tough for him to get some of those things. But they were a great quartet in their longevity. My heavens, you know, 20 odd years of thing. They grew up and became people in there. You know, before they were just grubby kids.
Just kids. I was teaching at Fern Creek, and they came over in the early 70s as high school kids and sang in the Music Man at Fern Creek. And I've lost it, but I had a program that had the Bluegrass Student Union, and I mean to tell you, they were just wet behind the ears. They were just young kids, you know.
Well, the name itself was quite a thing. It was given to them by one of the chapter members, a fellow by the name of Chuck Falzone, and Chuck was one of these real eggheads, you know, highly intelligent, highly educated. And he eventually relocated into the East Coast. But he's the guy that with all these young kids and everything. He's the one that came up with the student part first, and then it finally evolved into student union, Bluegrass Student Union, and there it was. So there were several people that were involved with the Bluegrass kids.
My memory is that Paul Morris started with the Bluegrass, and I could be wrong with that, but
there's a couple of funny things there. Yeah, basically, they used to they used to claim that Rosemary was their first coach, and you know, Rosemary is just tone deaf and can't sing a lick, you know, but she was kind of took care of them, the logistics and a couple of things like that, and they used to kid about her being their first coach. Paul was, I think he did work out with them a little bit. I don't think it lasted very long.
Okay. Just for the record, the Bluegrass Student Union, Rick Stabb was the bass, Kenny Hatton lead, Alan Hatton was tenor, and Dan Burgess was the baritone. And as he said, all of them grew up in the Thoroughbreds with, I think Rick's uncle, was he not, was a member of is that right?
Yeah, and he also had a brother that was in the Thoroughbreds, and they were all almost exactly the same age.
Yeah.
And well, except the two brothers there. I mean, Alan was older than Kenny, but they were all right about high school graduates within a year or two of one another.
Yeah. Okay. Now the next. There were some other quartets in there that I want to ask you about was the class of '84, which came along in '84. Any memories of that and working with them? I don't know that you did or not.
Well, I really don't have any memories, or had no connection at all with class of '84, except them as their having been chorus members. but I didn't have anything to do with any of the coaching or anything other than their chorus activity.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty good quartet.
Pretty good quartet, yeah. Now let's talk about the interstate, which I know is very close to you, in the sense that you have a son-in-law as a member of that, and also those four men: Joe Conley, Paul Gilman, Kip Buckner, and Jay Hawkins. Tell us a little bit about that, how it came about, and as much as you want to say about the interstate.
Well, the original quartet was without Paul Gilman. They were a medalist quartet before Paul joined them. And the baritone singer was a fellow by the name of Jeff Muka. He was Bob Muka's son. Very volatile individual. And they were trying to secure anything and all. And Joe Connolly was trying to soak up anything at all he could about barbershop. He was like a sponge. I mean, he just was after everything. 18 or 19 years old. And Jay was the old man of the quartet. He's a few years older, 10 years older than the other ones, I guess. And then the quartet itself, our coaching team primarily was myself and Kenny Buckner, and as it was with Marquis, as a matter of fact. And we worked pretty hard with them on plain nuts and bolts stuff, the plain and simple, this is the way you sing and this is the way you link it up, and this is the way you balance it. And they eventually became, maybe to this day, I don't know of any quartet that ever was more precise and accurate and synchronized as well as those guys were. I mean, they were absolutely phenomenal on plain and simple precision of singing. They went through the normal growing pains of a quartet, pushing too hard, trying too hard, fighting among themselves. That was one of the biggest things that happened. Kenny and I always said that when you coach interstate rivals, you didn't coach as much as you were a referee. And Jeff was primarily he was pretty much the one that was behind all the fighting and everything. Kip was his psyche was rather what shall I say,
explosive,
fragile.
Yeah.
And Joe was aggressive to a fault. He just wanted to get it done, no matter who's in the way, Jay was the glue in the quartet. If it hadn't been for his, many of the time, I mean, I'd hear him say, Jeff Muka, one time particularly said, look, if you're going to wear that, if that necktie is going to be part of the uniform, I'm out of this quartet. Now, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, that they would do. And eventually, Jeff, I don't know whether he's having personal problems or what, but Jeff missed a couple of shows with him, and he eventually had to replace him. And they were already medalists by this time. And when Paul Gilman joined them, Paul Gilman joined them, and of course he's as solid as a rock. I mean, he's and he was great stabilizing influence, and they won with him. I mean, Gilman had 2 gold medals and didn't have anything else. That's the only thing he ever won was gold medals. With same way, with well, it wasn't with Marquis, but so Interstate Rivals was it was a study in all kinds of psychology. There was a great rivalry between interstate rivals in some of the personnel of bluegrass. I guess that's the best way to put it, and I need to go any further with it. And that was there was a lot of mind games being played, between the two. But they became very adept at what they did. They won the gold up in Hartford, '87, and it wasn't long after that finally Joe and Kip were just not getting along too well, and they broke up. And of course, Joe, as you well know right now, Joe is a professional barbershopper. He makes his living coaching quartets and choruses, and is very much in demand. And that was the start of it. Shall we go on to Marquis, or you want more about?
That's fine. Go ahead, go right to Marquis, because that's a link there.
Well, Marquis was a spin-off of another quartet called the Naturals, and I was one of the coaches of the Naturals. As a matter of fact, I was one of the very first ones when they were getting organized. They were mostly all of them out of Cincinnati, and that was Mike Connolly and Jim. It's terrible.
I hear you.
Well, anyway, Mike Connolly and I think let me see, who was the baritone? And Mike was the lead. Randy Chisholm was involved, and they couldn't pick that final step. They won a couple of medals with Jay singing baritone, and they won a couple of medals. Finally, Randy was saying that it wasn't happening, and he decided that he wanted to get another group together. And that's when they got Dale and Paul and Jay and Randy formed up Marquis. These guys were very learned barber choppers and very accomplished singers, each one of them. All of them having been very competition oriented and toughened, so to speak. I think the biggest thing insofar as coaching was concerned was about Marquis was that we had a situation. Randy Chisholm was, before he got into barbershop and anything, was a band singer. He sang with a band. I think it was kind of a in-between crossover type band, some rock and roll and some regular stuff. And he was with that, and he was a heavy stylistic singer. And sometimes with barbershop, it doesn't work too well, primarily because it's hard to synchronize. If all four can be stylistic at the same time, it's all right. But so that was one thing that had to go. But he was a very powerful singer, and of course, a very passionate singer. He gets into a song, and he gets into a song. It's and like I said, he was a very powerful voice, a very broad, heavy voice. And so the first thing that was obvious that we had, each time that Marquis sang, we had the Randy Chisholm show going on. We had a lead singer and some harmony backup. And so wasn't that it was not pleasing to listen to, but we weren't ringing chords. They weren't ringing the chords because they weren't balanced, And just had to bring them closer together. And of course, the first thing we did was to tell Randy he's going to have to cool it a little bit, calm it down, and get rid of some of the little trills and stuff that he put in there. And so we tried that out. And it didn't last very long, because all of a sudden you found out that we didn't have Randy Chisholm anymore. It was just a whole new person, and it wasn't good. So Randy was set back free again to do his thing, and the other three guys just had to come up to him, and we had to convince them to, that they weren't over singing, that they were, the normal things that you'd run into there. They all had the ability. It was just a question of getting them to understand what had to take place. And once that happened, why, it didn't take long. They're very passionate, emotional quartet, and it was one of the most fantastic organizations. When I say organization, the marquee nation, so to speak, with all the families, including the kids. I don't have it here, it's downstairs. When the day they won, when we did the cover photograph for the harmonizer, they wanted a photograph made of all the marquee people, and wives, mothers, dads, grandparents, coaches, anybody involved in the thing. They had something like 31 people, 31 people all in this thing, and we had them crowded into a spot where we had made a picture of 4 people, so it was kind of chummy and everything. I got a copy of it downstairs, but they were very, and to this day, the marquee legend holds still, and they still meet what's left of the family, and of course Randy's widow and his two daughters, they still get together, and fortunate that a good portion of the time it's down here. Jan Chisholm lives down in Houston right now. She's quite a fine person, and doing very, very well in industry. And so right to this day, if there's any revenue that comes out, record sales or anything like that, if there's any revenue, or if the other part of Marquee, they still get occasionally sing a show, and any part of Marquee, any revenue that they get, Jan gets her share. And so it's a very close group. It's a unique group, and it was a shame that had to happen. Randy died when he was 46 years old, and he was an an institutional salesman, and he had demonstrated some kind of a machine, a floor waxing machine or something, at a nursing home. And he got finished with the thing, and can you cut off? Let's see where we're at with Marquee.
Yeah, talk about Randy Chisholm.
Yeah, Randy, anyway, he demonstrating this thing, must have nicked himself on the hand or the arm or something, and picked up a staph infection. And in 3 or 4 days he is running a 104, 105 fever, and got him into the hospital, and ended up he got hooked up on everything he could hook up on. And in about a week, they finally, decided to pull all the plugs, and he's in a coma the whole time.
Yeah.
And sure enough, we were all there for on a Sunday afternoon. Everybody was there when Randy died. We spent several days with him and his being in the coma. We spent several days of just going in one by one and talking to him and singing to him, and trying to. They said sometime you can snap him out of a coma.
Yeah.
He blinked his eyes a couple of times, but other than that, he never did. And finally, it was all hopeless and everything like that. And so they said they were going to disconnect things, and they did, and I mean, you know, within 15 minutes, well, he just stopped breathing. And so they organized again with a fellow by the name of Denny Gore from Detroit that sang with a quartet called the Vagabonds, and who had a championship just taken away from them. No need for me to get into that because I get very passionate about it. But they were silver medalists back in the 70s. They were silver medalists when the Bluegrass Junior Union was in for the first time. Okay. That would have been 76, I think, and in San Francisco. And anyway, Denny Gore sang with them, and they were quite popular and did quite a few shows. And Denny has now assumed part of the Marquis family, and he's having these problems physically right now. He's got some heart problems, but he sang with them long enough to qualify as a member of AIC. So he's in that, and he's full-fledged Marquis person. Yeah, great guy too.
The one that we've not really talked about is Dale Fettig. Talk a little bit about Dale.
Okay, Dale Fettig. All of these guys were pretty sharp individuals. By that I mean they were all pretty well-to-do. Dale was an engineer. Now I don't know that he was an engineer, but he was involved with many years with production of jet engines at the GE plant in Cincinnati, and eventually I don't know exactly what happened, but I don't know if they downsized or what, but he left the company as a paid employee, and immediately became a consultant, and was being paid more money than he was as a, you know. And from a musical standpoint, he's a real a study in contrast. You sang tenor, and beautiful voice, sings like a bird, really hardly any musical education or knowledge at all. I had a hard time reading music, I had a hard time learning music, everything, but boy, once he got it, he's one of the few people singing that part, singing tenor. I digress just a minute here. So tenor singers are almost there just for a little purpose of putting that nice little zing to a chord. You know, the pretty things that make it really neat. They don't really have a whole lot of influence on the selling of the song or the story of the song or anything like that, but they just, when the time comes, they pop in those little nice notes up there that make everything sound so pretty. Now, of course, Dale could do that just like everybody else, but he's one of the few people. There's only few, maybe that many tenors that I know in a whole society that had the ability to actually influence the emotional tenor of the quartet. The emotional, I mean, his tenor singing was that influential, and it's something that wasn't necessary. This isn't a necessary thing. Like I told you, it's what the tenor normally does. But he had that ability. Kip Buckner has that ability. There's another fellow out on the West Coast by the name of Jerry Fairchild that had that ability. Outside of that, I really can't think of any of them I've ever heard. They just lay that baby in there and do what they're supposed to do. But Dale had this ability, and like I said before, very sharp individual. Has had a lot of health problems in recent years, and I just found out that he's probably in better shape right now. He just had some heavy surgery, but he's probably in better shape right now than he's been in many a year.
Glad to hear.
He had what was this Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease. He's had that and some heart problems, and this last surgery that they had was he's had a lot of what would they be hernia things. And the last surgery that he had, part of it was to get all of this mesh that was in his belly, but to get it all out of there. And apparently they've done that. And he's really in pretty good shape right now. So that's really, he's still recovering from that, but he's still in pretty good shape. So, and a terrific individual.
He sure is.
Getting back just a little bit to Randy. Randy would call me on the telephone twice every week, and we would discuss whatever happened that weekend. If they did a show somewhere, he'd have it all documented in his mind. Okay, Jim, we did this, and this kind of thing took place, happened. What do you think about that? And he actually educated me as much as anything, where I finally, was able to document and to catalog the duties of a lead singer was through Randy Chisholm. That this is the guy that makes everything happen. Or let me put it this way: nothing happens until he does it.
That's right.
And everybody else can maybe not do something, and it'll still come about. But if he doesn't do it, other three can do it perfectly, and it won't happen. And so, psychologically, this guy had to be the boss of the quartet, and when they were actually singing. And this is what we talk about. That's almost every week, about something along those lines. Or what about this song? Or how would you change the phrasing here or there? Every week we talk, at least once every week, sometimes twice a week. And then, right there towards the end, he lived in the Dayton area up there, and they asked him to direct that chorus up there. And he was really having his problems with it, but just fell in love with it. And then the phone calls were very, very more numerous, sometimes 3-4 times a week. And so that was with Randy. Then, of course, Paul we've already talked about. Paul was an Ohio State graduate, way up in the class, but worked for Scripps Howard media outlet. He's a computer programmer. Just a solid guy, and one of the best natural baritone singers I've ever heard. I mean, he just, the lead singer, he has a definite thing that he's going to do, and the bass singer has a definite thing that he's going to do, and the tenor singer is a very natural thing that he didn't have any trouble doing. The baritone singer, he takes whatever's left over. Now I'm talking to a baritone singer right now, so you're aware of what that means. Whatever part of a chord's left over, it might be high, it might be low, it might be a wicked thing, it might be natural, but whatever's left over, what they get to the baritone. And that was kind of fell into his bailiwick, and he handled it really very well. And he's got a new quartet going as of right now. They're splattered from all over the country, and they're just getting organized. I kind of imagine that they'll be somewhere in the maybe top 15 this year. And I can't say enough about Jay. Jay is a musically educated vocal musician. That's the best way to describe him. I mean, this is what he majored in, music education, from a vocal standpoint at Bowling Green State University up there, and they've produced they produce all kinds of barbershop quartet champions and collegiate quartets and all kinds of things up there. And he's a master of technique. Not that you don't have to get after him a couple little things every now and then, you do, but he can do anything, with his voice. Has a fantastic range. He's a bass singer, but he has sung baritone in a medalist quartet, and he could sing lead just as easy. Probably could sing a little tenor if he had to, and completely solid, dedicated barbershopper, and that was the makeup of that quartet. And it was just a tragedy that they had to break up.
Sure.
It really was a tragedy, because that would have been another bluegrass student union from a longevity standpoint, with a little less abrasive,
Yeah.
and quite a bit less abrasive.
I would be amiss if I don't mean, I know we're comparing apples and oranges, but since Paul and Jay were in both Marquee and Interstate, and you had two enormously gifted lead singers in Randy and Joe, and two tenors that you've described as unique, I would be amiss in asking you to compare the two. How would you do that?
Well, the first thing I'd have to say to him is that you mentioned apples and oranges, but outside of the style, they are completely at opposite ends of the spectrum. I would say that if you were going to take a quartet and lay it out completely in the barbershop classic style, with adhering to all of the judging procedures, all of the things that go with the judicial part of judging barbershop, he went like that. Marquee would win it hands down. If you talk about excitement, probably it'd go the other way to Bluegrass Student Union. And you can talk an awful lot about shades of gray in between, but there's the two big differences in the thing.
Okay.
Bluegrass Student Union, very flashy quartet. Marquee, pretty much down the line from the classic. Bluegrass Student Union, anything but classic quartet. Yeah. It went way beyond the envelope. Marquee, right within the parameters.
And Interstate Rivals falls where in that?
Interstate Rivals probably would fall a little bit towards the Marquee side, but they were so short in their barbershop life that it's kind of hard to say which way they were going to go.
Sure.
Because it wasn't long after they won the championship that Joe pulled the plug.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to Gas House Gang. Since we're kind of connecting those together, talk about Gas House Gang.
Okay, now the Gas House Gang, I can't claim any real connection with them from a coaching standpoint. I never had any formal working with the quartet here and me here, and this is what you do, and try this and try that. Never ever did take place. I did act as a consultant to the quartet with Jimmy Henry a couple of times about things, but their expertise and everything was so interior. They really, Jimmy Henry, of course, he's the choral director of a major university there in St. Louis, and has one of the finest choral programs in all of the whole Midwest, and he Dr. Jimmy Henry, you know, he's a PhD, and so I can't really claim any coaching with them except maybe an occasional bit of advice, like don't step in that hole or something like that.
Keep your shoes tied or something.
Yeah.
Well, any other quartets that come to mind that you've worked with that stand out in your thinking?
Well, I worked with a couple of. I worked with the chiefs of staff a little bit. Kenny Buckner was in Kenosha, Wisconsin at that time, and he was their primary coach. And there was a period of a couple of months where he was going to judge a contest that they were going to be in, and he couldn't coach them while he was doing that. And I kind of took over there a little bit, but that didn't, wasn't too much about that. Now, so there's a whole bunch of quartets that I've coached, but generally as a result of being involved with a barbershop school, a weekend HEC school, it's called Harmony Education Program School, and I've done a ton of those things, and all over the country, as a matter of fact. Both from a musical and also the cot school. What that is,
Yes.
of course.
Go ahead and explain that, Jim, a little bit.
Cot school is chapter officer training. What is that? The metaphor that part, or
Something like
whatever?
that. Anagram. What is that, Carrie?
Chapters officers training thing, and I've been on a lot of faculties of that where they had a category with course directors in there, and so I had a lot of those things that I did. I can't even tell you how many of those kind of things I've done. Troy, not anything in too much in the last, from after the after Cincinnati, things kind of tapered off a little bit. There's still quartets come in here. And we work with quartets. Jay and I work pretty much as a team now, and so we work with several of the ladies quartets have come in, and we've done a couple of sessions with Kentucky Vocal Union, and that's an experience. They're wonderful singers, but what they sing is, it kind of goes over my head.
I got you.
So that like I said, I've been very active with all kinds of schools and coaching sessions like that from all over the country and everything for a lot of years. I got to say one thing when you talk about coaching is that, back in the early days, I used to just try to keep a week or two ahead of the troops, and when I was trying to learn all this stuff. And we won the thing in '66 with my first championship, and we won that thing in Chicago, and we talked about that, I think, a little earlier. And oh boy, the thing about coaching came from all over, and like a dumbbell. I decided to do a weekend coaching session with Mason City, Iowa chorus, River City chorus, and I became just fast friends with those people. But man, I wasn't any more equipped to do a decent job back there than I was to fly. I just didn't have the ability, to diagnose anything first. If I knew what they wanted to do, I could help out. But being listened to a chorus and say, well, you're doing this and you're doing that, we got to work out. Oh, boy, it was just whoa. So the first few months of my coaching career was pretty was just awful.
All of us who've tried to teach know exactly what you're talking about.
Well,
I
maybe
was
so.
was maybe a half an hour ahead of my students in the early days, and
Yeah.
not a day, but a half an hour, hoping that the bell would ring before I finished.
Well, that's not good to hear. I never quite heard it that way before, but
And so you're not alone
Yeah.
there.
You mentioned Jim Henry. We haven't really talked a little bit and briefly, I guess. Jim Henry, Jim Clancy, some of the other directors that
Okay.
you've worked with close.
I think Jimmy Henry is probably destined to be one of the greatest this society has ever had. He already is, of course, he's a quartet champion and a chorus director champion. And like I said, his background is impeccable. He is educated up to there in choral music and music execution. In addition to that, he just flat loved music, and he just, and they've had their tragedies. They had a tragedy. His younger brother,
Yeah.
or it might have been his older brother. I don't know which one, but his brother, died in his 40s, and that's when. Well, they never did ever really recover from that.